So the next aspect of private life in Victorian society is socializing. So especially people who could afford it from the middle class and upwards, did all day, how they socialized, how they maintained social connections before the telephone, before the internet. Everything had to be done in person, of course. So they developed a very complex system of the so-called calls, paying calls. This was connected with a special prop that was very important in Victorian culture, namely calling cards. They were really like name cards today, but their function was different. Nowadays, they are exchanged if you meet a new person, usually in some sort of business arrangement. It gives you the name of the person, some contacts like the telephone or the email address. Uh, the Victorians had a very similar object, the visiting card or the calling card, but they used it differently. This was actually left by the guest who was visiting the host. And the system of paying calls was the principal way of socializing in the Victorian period, especially among the middle classes. This was especially popular among women. This was their primary social recreation, something that they would do very often, sometimes even every day or multiple times a week. These were short visits, no longer than 30 minutes, and they were not really performed among close friends. Visiting close friends or visiting family members was something slightly different. These were just kind of ceremonial calls, ceremonial visits to ensure the maintenance of social contact. So the practice was usually in the early afternoon, but they were still called morning clothes because the hostess did not have to dress in outdoor clothes. So they would be wearing the same clothes they wore in the morning. Uh, so if the woman was quite popular, she would have several calls during the day, and the callers would leave the cards either of themselves or their husbands. This was the way to ensure further social contacts later on that would include more members of the family. So if there was a dinner or a dance organized, they would get the invitation. That was basically the idea. The calls were a very important way of notifying the acquaintances that you were back from the holidays if you went away, that you were back from the childbed if you had a new child, that you were back from the period of grieving. We'll talk about the mourning and the funerals in a little moment, or if you were back into, I don't know, good health, let's say. So these cards were used for that. The very important aspect of social life for the richer sections of the society, especially the aristocracy, was the social season. This was the calendar of social functions, mostly taking place in spring and summer, because the parliament was in session. This was really it started with the practice of the members of parliament moving to London for the spring and summer and taking their families along. So the families would be involved in some entertainments, in some social activities, and also the members of parliament, the fathers, would join in the evening. So these would include sporting events such as horse races or regattas. These would include cultural events such as the exhibitions at the Royal Academy of Arts. But there would also be quite a lot of private events happening in this period, including dinners and balls and dances, and even the royal family would have their own social events, of course, only for the aristocracy, including the balls and the so-called drawing rooms, which was a ceremony in which the daughters of the aristocracy were presented at court, and later they would be included in the invitations to dinners and balls. Of course, the purpose was for them to find a good husband. So that's really the most important thing. There are some fashions concerning socializing, especially the meals in the Victorian period. There was a fashion for dinners that were served. Let's say there were two fashions for dinners. One was the style in which all the dishes were displayed on the table, and people would just serve themselves from the table. So like the entire dinner was set out on the table. And later there was the style called the Russian style, à la Russe. Which meant that it required more servants, because they would be actually changing the plates and serving the dishes to the people at the table in the sequence. So this was more expensive, this was considered to be more elegant, and of course this was the mark of status for the hosting family. A very popular cultural practice connected with those dinners, because this was one of the social functions in which the couples would come. But before the dessert was served, there was a custom of so-called withdrawing. So the ladies would leave the company, they would go into the drawing room. The drawing room was the principal female area in the house, so the hostess would take the female guests into the drawing room after the main dishes were served, and they would leave the men to talk manly subjects for I don't know, half an hour or until the hour, let's say, and then the ladies would rejoin the company for dessert. So the idea was that even though the meal was eaten by men and women together, there was a separate time afterwards, so that the men could discuss their subjects and women could discuss their subjects separately before joining for coffee and cake. So that's it, and we continue in a moment.